Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah, amma ba'd. Greetings of peace, ladies and gentlemen. This video is a commentary on the recent Talk TV interview with Douglas Murray entitled They Don't Want to Integrate. Douglas Murray on multiculturalism in Britain not working. So this whole political uproar in the recent days comes from George Galloway's election in the Rochdale by-election. And I just wanted to address some slight misconceptions with the way that this is being presented to the people. First and foremost, I want to tackle something that Douglas Murray rightly brings up in the interview relating to the association with the town of Rochdale and the absolutely contemptible, deplorable, and wholly unpardonable, disgusting acts of the famous grooming gangs, rape gangs. And what I wanted to just first off say is that although the men who were perpetrated for their absolutely abhorrent crimes had backgrounds, that's to say that 9 men were convicted, 8 of them being British Pakistani, and Pakistani by heritage and British by adoption, I guess, and British by passport, perhaps. Certainly they were raised in the country. And then the one other person was an Afghani asylum seeker to come to our country and to take the mickey like that, which is the whole problem, which is seeped into our society, the weakness of the leadership, and as a result, the blame that's being laid upon the people who have just come to take their free slice of the pie, I guess. But my point is that the 9 men convicted were not practicing Islam, even though they came from the Islamic world. They came from countries who are Muslim in the same way that America and England and Australia are Christian countries. Yes, Afghanistan and Pakistan are Muslim countries. This does not mean that everybody adheres to the teachings and the true principles of Islam. So what we need to get out of our brain is that the men who got convicted for those terrible crimes were somehow endorsing Muslim ethic and somehow representing the billions of practicing Muslims across the world and millions that are in our great nation. So this is why it's problematic, because we hear Rochdale, we straight away think of that atrocity. And now what's being pushed is, yes, I agree that multiculturalism, I remember saying this way before I was Muslim, back in the day, has its problems, obviously. Something I want to get straight into, though, is that the 2021 consensus states that the population of the constituency of Rochdale is 114,400 people, of which the majority are white English people, 62.7%. The Asian community in Rochdale is 29.6%, a decent minority. And then there's 3.1% black. So when Douglas Murray says in this Talk TV interview that George Galloway represents what a significant number of the people in that voting district want, well, that's obviously true because he was voted to power, but we forget that the majority of those people that he has represented and that voted him in are white English people. Rochdale is not this 80% Muslim community. The Muslims are a minority, and the majority of the community, of the population of that area, can quite easily outvote any quote-unquote extremist Islamist movement that seeks to gain any democratic sway. So that's the first thing that I think we need to seriously understand, is what seems to be pushed is that Rochdale represents Muslim people, when Rochdale is, as a constituency, is a decent majority of white English people. So then that brings to question, is it also white English people who are who are displeased, who feel disenfranchised, who wish to make a statement and vote against the mainstream political narrative. Then we talk about mass migration. The issue with mass migration is one of integration, as being spoken about. And I just wanted to mention one thing that is along the lines of, if we look at the English expat communities in other countries, whether that be Spain, whether that be the UAE, wherever you go in the world, Thailand, Saudi, anywhere one goes as an Englishman, there's going to be English-speaking expat communities that you're going to integrate into if you so wish. Yes, you can integrate with the local population if you choose, but this is what English people do when they retire and they leave the country and they go somewhere else. Do the English folk of Benidorm integrate into the Spanish society and learn the Spanish language and embrace the Spanish culture? No, they are notoriously and unapologetically English people on the southern tip of the Iberian Peninsula. So I think that it's very dangerous to start pointing a finger and demanding an integration situation when this is not what the English people do themselves. It cannot even be expected. And if we look at other areas of society, most major cities in certainly our country of England have Chinatowns, Little Italies, Polish communities, Eastern European communities, Caribbean communities. And these don't always necessarily perfectly and wholly harmoniously integrate into the English culture. Now, there has to be something to be said about respecting the culture at hand, and I do agree that it should remain the majority and dominant culture. But this is something that needs to be spoken about, that yes, Douglas Murray's book, The Strange Death of Europe, speaks about how the leaders of our country are committing a cultural suicide. But this weakness of the leaders of this country cannot be blamed on minority religious or ethnic groups. Yes, of course, we must stand up and condemn any form of threatening and violent behavior to impact free, fair, and democratic processes. But at the same time, we are Great Britain, that we are, the empire on which the sun never set. Are we really going to acquiesce to threats from some far right, extremist, Muslim, Islamist people? No, these are side people. These are side men. Push them to one side, enforce a situation where that's clearly not tolerated. So pandering to the local Muslim vote, even if that was the case, focusing on the conflict in the Holy Land, the response is from more than the Muslim community, because bearing in mind, like I said, in the constituency of Rochdale in the northwest of England, not even 30% of the community are Asian, and therefore we can't pretend that this is like a Muslim-only issue. This affects all people in the country. Douglas Murray cries that there is no far-right influence in British politics, of which, on that statement, I would certainly agree with him. But my question is, where is the Islamist extremist presence? Yes, the threats, the encroachment, the pushing on up to the territory that we should allow. But again, where's this response? There should be a reasonable response and not a conflation between these strange extremist sections of what I would argue are not even the Muslim community and just the general normal practicing Muslims. We don't like thugs, he says, of any kind intimidating our representatives, let alone threatening them. I just wanted to get up something dead quick relating to the Arabic word al-adab. It is the context in Islam for the preferred etiquette of one's behavior. It translates to something along the lines of refinement, good manners, moral decorum, decency, and humaneness. And acts outside of this parameter of courtesy and respect that include intimidation and threats is clearly not people practicing Islam, because again, under the Sharia, we live in the land of the non-Muslim. We must abide and respect to their law. So it's not a tough issue what's going on here. it sounds like a lot of stirring, fear-based troping, because although I agree that there should be, and this is where I'm bigging up Nigel Farage, I can't see anything that the Farage is saying that is unreasonable. I think strong borders is representative of a strong nation. I think weak borders is representative of a weak nation. Nothing bigoted or racist there. This country, like Douglas Murray says, and I agree, is diverse enough. But the main thing I want to focus on is that, yes, strong borders prevent illegal immigration. We've hit the limit. The pot is boiling over. But what we need to focus on now, first and foremost, yes, we need to reclaim the integrity and strength of the nation. But after that point, bearing in mind we've got approximately 4 million Muslims who are breeding at a more than replacement rate, as opposed to the white English population who can't even have enough babies to replace themselves. Yes, the Muslim population, even if we capped immigration, would be rising and the English population would be diminishing. So we have to understand and work towards some form of fair and just coexistence. And this is why on this channel I'm saying I want the Christian English white people to be having more babies, because ultimately otherwise there's going to be more tension in the future because the Muslim population is on the rise. So Douglas Murray goes on to say that some diversity is good for society, but there must be some point at which it is no longer. I would say that point is when communities of people who hold on to prejudices that they've brought from their country of origin and start to push it on the political system. Worst of all, when this happens in a threatening manner, as it does in sections of the Muslim community in this country. So, very interesting stuff. I feel that diversity is good, but should we be blaming the minority for basically the modern, wokey, liberal agenda, the weakness of the people to contain the borders, to have the interest of the everyday hard-working English citizen at heart? No, what it is like, say, the classism that exists in this country. If we can get an extra few percentage on the economic system, if the GDP can be increased by 1%, but we're going to let in a load of foreigners at risk of turbulence in the cultural marketplace, then so be it. What happens, at the bottom of society is kind of none of the business of these people who are next level wealthy and powerful. I mean, something to bear in mind, if people are still listening at this point, please subscribe to the channel and comment below what you're thinking about. Hopefully, relating to what I'm saying is a very reasonable position to take. Treating Muslims as the other is not going to allow us to create a more harmonious Britain. The majority of these Muslims now have been born in this country, raised in the system, and have a British identity to some degree. And I agree, the ones that don't want to be here should leave. But if what I've said resonates, then like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment below if you can relate to this issue that is creating this patriotic, white nationalist energy, people of this land against the kind of the foreign immigrant other, when ultimately, who's to blame here? There's people, seats in power. I don't think people realize how deep the rabbit hole goes when it comes to wealth in this country. Most people, the median income after you pay your tax each month is approximately £2,000 a month. Now, with the cost of living crisis, your bills, your rent, your mortgage, your internet, your subscriptions, your phone, your petrol, your car, everything, you're done. You're done. £2,000 don't do nothing. So it's money in, money out, paycheck to paycheck. That's the average person, let alone below average. Now, if you're getting a little bit above average, then alhamdulillah, good for you. I think that the top 10%, you are somewhere in the region of doubling that median. So you're now bringing in about £3,500, £4,000 after tax, something about 60 to 70 grand a year. which to a lot of people, oh, that's good, 60, 70 grand a year, decent. Yeah, you got a little bit more than other people. Yeah, you might have a slightly nicer car on finance. You might have a slightly bigger house on a mortgage. You're still wrapped up in debt. You're still basically living paycheck to paycheck in a slightly more extravagant and higher status oriented position in society. Now you get to the top 1% of earners in the country who, again, you double that again, and you're talking about somebody who's bringing in 7, 8, 9, 10 grand a month. You're talking about 120 to 180 grand a year. Now you're thinking, whoa, these people are absolutely minted. They're next level. This is nothing money compared to the people who ultimately move the chess pieces, the people who own the big, vast amounts of property and land and businesses and the generational wealth. It's nothing. And so playing off the pawns against one another, the white pawns against the Muslim pawns, it's like, let's be thinking, who is the king and queen? Who are the people moving things, guys? So I just think that people need to have a slightly broader perspective of this whole thing. The main thing that I wanted to talk about, to be honest, was representing Rochdale like as an entirely Muslim issue, to emphasize again the 2021 census of the constituency of Rochdale said that 62.7% of the population are white. A minority of 29.6% are Asian, and this is going to be the predominantly Pakistani Muslim community. Of how many of those are actually properly pious, God-conscious Muslims that uphold the ihsan, the idealization, the aspiration to the attainment of perfection of Islam? Probably a small percentage of those. Now, I'm not saying that I'm the perfect Muslim, far, far from it, but what intrigued me and enticed me and brought me to embrace the faith of Islam is the beauty of its aspiration. And what I'm seeing is so much blood and war and hostility and resentment in the trenches that we need to like rise up a little bit, raise out of this very low level biting at one another like animals, growling dogs, fear. And let's look to like go to our angelic nature and think, okay, is there more than meets the eye? You can never... People are easily played, folks. And what I wanted to say is that I think Nigel Farage hits the nail on the head. I think Douglas Murray touches on reasonable points. Multiculturalism not working in Britain, that's reasonable. So should we blame the minority cultures who have migrated here? Or should we blame the system and the people that allowed it to happen? Let's think a little bit more deeply and rationally, folks. So what I wanted to say is that I have no opinion on George Galloway. I have no deep opinion on the conflict in the Holy Land. I think that it's all obvious bread and circuses, divide and conquer. And I was going to make a short video on this, but I'll leave on this point. My question is, what will be next? We seamlessly transition from one all-encompassing, engulfing situation to another. Rewind 4 years ago, the pandemic hits. You've now got restrictions and masks and vaccinations and deaths and the fear in society. Nobody was thinking about Muslims 4 years ago, guys. In fact, if you look, it was Muslims who were the first to risk their lives and die on the front line of the NHS. The Muslims, normal Muslims, God-conscious Muslims who are contributing to the society and have integrated to a reasonable degree are an asset to the country. Then we've got, after, what was it? A year, well, it was about 2 years later, because that took a whole 2 years because there was 3 different lockdowns and stuff. 2 years later, then the war in Ukraine hits. That takes over for what's now been 2 years. And in recent times, about 6 odd months ago, you've got the war in the Holy Lands, which, by the way, is not a new thing. But again, it comes into the consciousness of everybody and everybody eats it up because that's what's being fed to them. This conflict's been going on since way before I was born, way before many of you were born. In fact, way before the vast, vast majority of you were born, because I'm sure very few people watching this were born before 1948. So I guess what it is it's a call to perspective. It's a call to actually look into the deen of al-Islam, the way of the pious, predecessors and the prophets of Islam look into the history, look into the past, and realize that we are actually being duped. What people are being fed is a fear tactic. It's like old school politics, guys. I agree with, like, say, some of what Douglas Murray says. I prefer Nigel Farage, hands down, because he sticks on a very specific political front. And what he says is incredibly reasonable, and I've never heard him say anything that is unreasonable in any way. So I guess this is me, somebody who is, I would like to think, a reasonable and rational individual, a relatively well-educated and well-versed person, you know, like, say, culturally, been about the place, visited different places around the world, met different people. And all I'm trying to say is that don't eat what's being fed to you by the mainstream media. Any benefit from this video is from Allah. Any mistakes and errors are entirely my own, and Allah knows best. Big up your good selves.